Good morning, everyone. Hello. Welcome to another session of Lockdown Lessons. I'm Bex. I was with you last Wednesday and here I am again. And crikey, how much can happen in a week? Time's doing strange things in lockdown. Sometimes it feels really sluggish, doesn't it? Not much changes. You forget what day of the week it is. And then some weeks are like dynamite and things just move on and you can't imagine how it was last week. So we've had some small wins here. We've reached our crowdfunder target, which is going to enable Lockdown Lessons to continue for a while longer. So we'll still be here, hopefully, creating a really positive learning community. Thanks for being part of it. Remember, you can always comment on the lessons during the lessons. So I'll be asking questions and we're really keen for you to interact with us. Joe Biden's in the White House. So that was a big, obviously, huge big deal last week. So yeah, it's been a big week. I hope you're doing all right. It's not been an easy week. It's still raining, but daffodils, spring is in the offing. We're gonna get there, guys. It's gonna be fine. So if you were with me last week, you'll know that we looked at the topic of juxtaposition. And today's lesson is going to be developing, thinking about how juxtaposition works in literature specifically. If you missed last week's session, don't worry, hop onto, after this lesson, hop onto the channel. All the lessons that we're delivering are saved there, so you can catch up or review as you wish. You should be okay. If you did miss that session, I'm going to go over what juxtaposition is and how how we can apply it when we're looking at analysis. So on that note, can you come up with a definition of juxtaposition? Whilst I'm waffling on a little bit, you can have a think about that and put your thoughts in the comments. So juxtaposition, can you come up with a definition? And just to get you thinking about that, oops, not that one, this one. This is another image by Banksy, who we used last week as well, which employs the device of juxtaposition. So maybe that'll get you thinking about it. And by the way, thank you to those students that sent in some analysis of the Trolls lyrics. Some really great stuff came through, and one of the most powerful analyses that I read linked slurping coffee, sorry, once a teacher, linked the analysis kind of conclusions to the narrative itself and the characters of Branch and Poppy, and that was fantastic because it anchored the analysis in the text, and that's what you should always do. You know, try and draw your conclusions from a basis of the context in which your quotes come from. So well done. Okay, so let's have a little chat about what we're going to be doing today. And yeah, thanks Chloe, placing two unlike things side by side, fantastic. Yeah, so it's the positioning of two unlike things next to each other for effect. It might be shock, surprise, humour, and you know the effects are multiple, though that's not a definitive list, but it's meant to be arresting, it's meant to be disconcerting. And so we're going to look at that, how it's worked, used really effectively in a piece of literature today. When I was an English teacher for in secondary schools and in FE, there was always a groan when I'd pick up the poetry book. Poetry today, and there'd be this like collective sigh, not poetry. Poetry's hard, poetry's not accessible, poetry's not relevant. Where some of the complaints, you know, and my job, I think, one of my jobs as an English teacher is to imbue a love of all forms of literature, but specifically poetry, because it gets a hard rap. I mean, we encounter drama, so the classic forms of literature, let's say poetry, drama, prose, novels. We encounter drama all around us, TV, film. It's every day. So it may not be Shakespeare, but it's drama. We read stories, and the stories are read to us from a younger stage. Now, a lot of children's books actually are poetry, but as we develop, they become prose. So that's a more typical way, I suppose, of accessing words. And poetry just feels like, that's what you do in an English classroom. It doesn't have any relevance or importance, or doesn't speak to me on a day-to-day basis. You're wrong, I would say. So what I love about poetry, let me just bang on about it for a second, is its immediacy. So, you can write a poem and have it read by your audience within 30 minutes if you wanted to, if you have that kind of platform. But poetry is quick, it can be quick, and it can be responsive. A novel takes years to write. I'm still writing mine, like 10 years in. I'll keep you posted on that one. But yeah, it's responsive. For me as well, what I enjoy about it is that as a form, it kind of sits at the heart by borrowing elements of lots of other types of literature and art and writing. So it's part drama, particularly in its performative style. The fact you read a poem out loud. Not all poets would agree that they need to be read out loud, but it is dramatic and it can have a performative element. It's part music. There's a musicality to the form. Sometimes it feels like you're reading something quite personal, a diary entry, maybe. There are narrative forms of poems that tell stories, even short ones. Because of its responsiveness, it is quite journalistic. It can report and tell us about the world around us. And finally, on the page, some poems could be considered to be a form of visual art. So poetry, I think, is super important and super relevant. And never, in living memory, to be honest, can I pinpoint a moment where a poem and its author have had such resonance culturally and societally than last week. So when I left you last week, Joe Biden was being inaugurated, and at his inauguration, Amanda Gorman delivered the poem she wrote for the event, The Hill We Climb, which responded to Biden's message of unity, but also to the violent attacks on the same place, the Capitol, a fortnight previous to that. If you haven't seen her perform it, I would absolutely recommend that you do so. And we're going to look at that poem today in relation to how she uses juxtaposition within it. Interestingly, just before we move on to that, this is what she said about the form. And so rather than being a kind of redundant or old-fashioned form, I think, well, hopefully we'll hear in this reading, just how potent and how powerful it can be, and also how relevant it must be to affect social change. So before we just jump into it, that is, and Chloe, thank you, and Evie, fantastic. Yes, just juxtaposition. There we go. So if you weren't here last week, or do you want to confirm that definition? And obviously, maybe in the Banksy image we had earlier, the delightful flower vomit is possibly a juxtaposition of ideas and styles, also with the graffiti artist and the colour of the flowers. So juxtaposition, the placing of two unlike things side by side, emphasise their difference and invite exploration. And I think if this is another shot of Amanda Gorman delivering her poem, and there's to start here, there's a striking juxtaposition in terms of the visuals here. You have this young woman, significantly younger, she's 21, than the people around her at the heart of this ceremony. She actually finished it, concluded it. And she's almost glowing, resplendent in this yellow coat, and there's quite sombre, muted colours all around her. And I think that says a lot about her message, which was one of hope and possibility of light coming out. So let's hear her read it. And as we do, I'm going to show you the text of the poem. And I'd like you to have a look, please, for a couple of types of juxtaposition that she employs within it. So there's quite a lot here, quite a big list. So just try and pick out a few things as we go through. So she juxtaposes ideas. She uses juxtaposed words, juxtaposition of sounds in words, and also forms of structural juxtaposition, which sounds really complicated, but it isn't. So structure is just how the piece is composed. So that might be looking at how a sentence is composed, or maybe how chunks of the poem are put together or not. So it's the building blocks, as it were, of the poem itself. So see if you can find any juxtaposition within that. So maybe before we move on into hearing the poem, could you just write quickly, make some notes, ideas, words, sounds, and structure, juxtaposition that you're looking for as we read. I'll just give you a second to do that. Okay, so we were going to hear Amanda Gorman recite the entire poem of The Hill We Climb, and you're going to look for these forms of juxtaposition, and we'll have a chat about it on the other side. Okay.
When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is ours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gaze not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb, if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the west. We will rise from the wind-swept northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked south. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade of flame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
So, I absolutely think that we just should take a second there. I mean, if you've heard that before, did you find something new in it? If you've never heard it, what's your initial response? And I think this is so important with poetry specifically, because the first time you hear a poem like that has so many levels, the way you respond to it is emotional. Forget everything else. Forget trying to find a simile and metaphor. Forget my silly task of juxtaposition. And it should hit you here. It should make you feel something, hopefully, or make you think something. Feeling's a bit tenuous sometimes. So what's your feeling right now? How do you feel? Social media kind of went crazy for Gorman and her recital, and the words in the poem as well, obviously. And it was an emotional outpouring. People were crying having heard that. And maybe it's the context as much as anything, this message, given America's recent political history. But let's do juxtaposition. So Chloe, absolutely, some fantastic ideas there. Yeah, harm and harmony, such a good one, isn't it? Because it actually uses the same prefix, harm, that part of the word, and then it's brilliantly juxtaposed. So it's one of my favourites in the poem. So I asked you to look at four things. So it's juxtaposition of ideas, words, sounds, and structure. So let's have a little think about them in isolation. The big ones, so ideas. Yeah, Chloe, it was powerful. It's just, powerful. And I think she believes it has power, that words obviously have power, but that she can affect change. And I think that's an incredible thing to witness. So juxtaposition of ideas. There's a lot of ideas here, and to be honest, we haven't got time to look at all of them, but there's lots of nice juxtaposed thoughts, because I have referenced it, but the poem is almost in direct response in some ways to the events on the attack of the Capitol, which was a fortnight before Joe Biden's inauguration, and she was responding to that civil strife, this incredible moment in history, American history, where it did seem like it was at war with itself once again. And she's responding to that message much as Biden did in the inauguration, which was which was with a message of unity. I thought this was specific. The highlighted bit here kind of summed up that idea, juxtaposing pain with peace. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another, and she's cleverly playing on, again, using the homophone arms. So in the first instance, weapons, and then of course kind of the concrete noun arms, as in to hug. And I think that was a nice example of juxtaposition of ideas. So Chloe, you've got some really strong words there in terms of so concrete and abstract nouns, in terms of juxtaposition of words. So we won't spend too much time on this one. One of the central images she uses, light and shade, which is almost it's almost a direct comparison, light and dark, light and shade, and clearly it's metaphorical. But we could call that direct comparison antithesis. So it's a direct opposite. Okay, and again, I've picked out, down that second, that little triplet there of sentences. Grieved and grew, hurt and hoped, tired and tried. They're not direct opposites, but they're juxtaposed feelings and thoughts and ideas in these words. Okay, and then let's have a look at sounds. I'm not sure if you picked out any sounds. Let's have a little look at this section of the poem. Can anyone tell me what's going on here? Can anyone offer some thoughts on how the sounds are used? Maybe any terms that you would use to apply to sound in these highlighted sections, or any comments you'd like to make. I'm just going to let you sit with that for a second. So let's just read this bit through and see if you can hear what's happening. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colours, characters and conditions of man. So here she's employing alliteration, and she's employing it in the successive sentences. In the first sentence, polished, pristine, perfect and purpose. Yeah, Chloe, there is sibilance there as well, that those S sounds in a pristine, purpose. And for me it's the plosive alliteration that's impactful, that p. So that sound is formed right at the start, at the front of our mouth, through our lips, almost like an explosion. So it's a nice way of remembering that term, plosive. For those P sounds, B sounds are also plosive. And then the next sentence, she switches. She uses alliteration again, but juxtaposes it with this k. And it's an incredible litany of that sound repeated in that sentence. And that sound is formed at the back of the throat. So for me, it's just the range of sounds and the movement between them, which adds movement and power and momentum to these lines of the poem. Clever girl. And then the use of structure. So there's a structural device that she actually uses three times. She uses it here, and she uses it to conclude the poem as well, with that really strong ending. This is a device, a form of repetition that you might have come across before. So the even as, we will rise. So it's this repetition. But it's a specific form of repetition that's often used in speeches, actually. And her poem does have that element of, feeling quite rhetorical. And that this device, which has this kind of, which builds the power and the feeling in the poem very effectively, is called Anaphora. So it's a repetition of the same groups of words at the beginning of successive clauses or sentences. And the sense of certainty, assuredness, eloquence of something that's been considered and planned and rehearsed even, comes through the use of the anaphora. And you'll see this in many political speeches. So if you're looking at non-fiction texts as well, it's a really nice device to try and spot persuasive writing or persuasive speaking. Right, we're going to have a look at another example of how structure is used in juxtaposition. Oh, sorry, let's just go back to that slightly. How is that juxtaposed? Of course, it is juxtaposition because actually she moves from this very poetic, considered rhetorical style, employing the anaphora, with almost like a prose style. If you look at some of the lines around these very kind of more sort of poetic and formal lines, you have lines like, at a time where a skinny black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president only to find herself reciting for one. That doesn't feel particularly poetic. It feels almost prose-like. It's just like kind of, normal quote unquote writing. And it's this movement between this very high poetic rhetorical style using devices like Anaphora and the more kind of colloquial, conversational sentences that really add, that juxtaposition really adds movement and intrigue to the poem itself. And here's another example of structural juxtaposition. I'm going to pick out this quote specifically. Can anyone see what's going on here? So while we once asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? Again, we're using that k and p sound. But here, just look at the words themselves. We're looking at the structure, so how this sentence has been composed. Can you see anything interesting about its composition? So look at the word order specifically. Little clue. So if you draw a line after the word catastrophe, it's sort of in your mind, almost as if it's like a mirror, maybe. Put a mirror there and you'll see that we have this structure of this sentence: prevail, catastrophe, and then moving on, catastrophe, prevail, A, B, B, A. The structure of the sentence is mirrored. Almost. Yeah, good, Chloe. That's it. That's exactly it. Prevail over catastrophe is used twice in different ways. In fact, they're used twice in the complete opposite way, in the different word order. So she's playing with the word order. She's using the same words, but inverting the order. And this is a really powerful device. You can't overuse it because and you have to use it sort of cleverly, but it's incredibly powerful when it's done in this way. And it has this incredible feeling of absolute control and certainty. How could we prevail over catastrophe? Now I say, how can catastrophe prevail over us? And this inversion of the word order, the juxtaposition, if you will, of the word order between the first half and the second half of the sentence, gives this section incredible power. Now this device has got a horrible name, and Toby and I just still debating on how to pronounce it properly, but we're going to go with Antimetabole, okay? Antimetabole, and it's this A-B-B-A structure. So repetition of words in reverse order, like a mirror image across two clauses, okay? It's contrasting yet harmonious, so structurally interesting and arresting to hear, and it can create this very assertive, commanding tone. And actually, this device, Antimetabole, is got a bit of a history in American political speeches. If you're interested, Kennedy used it a lot JFK used it a lot in his speeches. So if you're interested in how, in some of these more kind of complex rhetorical devices and ideas, do explore his speeches as well. Okay, so juxtaposition. How do we write about it? We're going to develop this over the next couple of weeks. But in summary, if we're going to create like a heading or a topic sentence or a central argument about how Gorman uses juxtaposition and its effects, I would write something like this. So Gorman's use of various forms of juxtaposition creates poetic harmony and helps the poem's ideas, language and tone resonate. The contrasts she employs reinforce her message of unity over division and create a credible, forceful and memorable message of the importance of retaining hope and pursuing peace. So this might be the start of an essay about how Gorman uses language in her poem and how she specifically uses juxtaposition. So my challenge to you, obviously come back to this slide and have a look at it after the lesson. So if you're in the mood for a bit of analysis, a bit of work at home, not that that's all the work you do is at home at the moment, I'm aware of that, but if you want more, take that as your topic sentence and write me your analysis. Find some quotations, talk to me about how juxtaposition is used, maybe set yourself a little challenge of using a new word that you learned today in that analysis, and yeah, send it to us. So lockdownlessons@skoolcornwall.com. We will look at your work and we'll give you feedback on it. And then next week, I'm going to talk about how to pull that analysis together in a really, really strong, effective way. So we're going to be talking specifically about how to write literary analysis next week. So guys, it's been an absolute pleasure again being with you this Wednesday morning. I hope we will have really fantastic weeks. Toby will be back here tomorrow, and you can subscribe on our YouTube channel. Please do get in touch if you have ideas about what you want us to cover. We're at your disposal. We want to be responsive and flexible in what we're delivering. We're giving what we think you might need, but maybe you need something else. So do get in touch if there's something else we could cover. And yeah, check us out on Facebook, etc., etc. We will see you next week. Thanks, guys.